Good morning. We're in Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9 will begin in verse number 18. I'm going to be turning to that text. It is wonderful to see each and every one of you. We're thankful for your presence and thankful for your encouragement, enthusiasm as we sing. We're thankful to be able to worship God together and now to study together for a few minutes, especially about the authority of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. About 10 years ago, this doctor, a Nigerian by birth, Samuel Achalefu, kind of made some news because his idea / invention really began to show some promise in the world of surgery, and especially cancer surgery. He figured out that you could give an extremely low dose to a specific area, basically of some fluorescent chemicals, and then wear these glasses that he has on here, and then turn on infrared lights, and the cancer cells would glow. The rest of the cells would not glow. And so what he developed was an idea and a way in which they could see, with special lenses and special chemicals, that which they previously could not see. And therefore they could remove that which they had not been able to see with the naked eye and give the patient a much better outcome. Whether that was a much better prognosis or whether that was just a smoother surgery experience, he could see what could not otherwise be seen with this special invention. When we get to this section of the miracles in Matthew chapter 9, we're seeing the authority of Jesus on display, and Jesus intentionally wants us to see that which we likely would not have ever seen had he not shown us. He's going to tell us in Matthew chapter 9, in verse number 6, the scene is this house where there's a paralytic, a lame man, and you've even got skeptics around. And when Jesus says, "Son, your sins are forgiven," those skeptics go off the rails. They accuse Jesus of blasphemy. And so he says, "So that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sin, rise up and walk." He then says to the paralytic, he directly makes the connection that what we see as maybe one of our ultimate problems for humanity, sickness, he says is not the greatest problem. Sin is. But so that you can see that which we cannot see with the naked eye, the forgiveness of sins, let me show you something you can see. A lame man walking immediately. He then makes a similar connection just a few verses later, Matthew 9, 12 and 13. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but to call sinners. So Jesus says, these signs connect the dots to sin. And then he says, I want you to see me as the physician who heals, but who heals far more than just the physical, who offers to heal us from sin. Sin, sinners, equals to sick there in that passage of Matthew 9, 12 and 13. We need to see ourselves as being infected by sin and especially see Jesus as the only one who can and then who will heal us from that sin. So we move through these three narrative accounts, these miracles that happen in our section. We want to keep that in mind, that there is a higher order and we must see these beyond the physical and the medical. Faith now has been introduced as the key component. You're going to see that come to the surface in these as well. Notice especially as we read through these, how they all bear a level of understanding. Why do they come to Jesus in the first place? With all of these, you can see they have a clear understanding of who he is and what he offers. The difference is they're not just hoping this is another thing that might work, whereas previous things have not worked. They come to him knowing something about what he has taught and about who he is. Therefore, they come with faith. Let's read beginning together verse number 18, there in Matthew chapter 9. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler, we're told Jairus is his name in Mark and in Luke, a ruler came in and knelt before him. That's a posture of worship. He falls down to ask Jesus this. He's a ruler and he's falling down before Jesus. What could be so important that a man with authority himself would fall down before Jesus. Well, listen, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, did you catch the first behold? Behold a ruler. Now you see it again, verse 20. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, "If only I touch his garment, I will be made well." First observation from this part of the text, I think, needs to be that Jesus enters our chaos while he always maintains control. You don't see it as much in Matthew's account because he is one who makes things concise to make his overarching theological point, but you really get a sense of the crowds and the hustle and the bustle surrounding Jesus and his disciples in Mark. But even here you do see some of this chaos. And I think that's part of what Matthew's doing when he uses this word behold. Behold. It's as if Jesus cannot continue teaching and continue his interactions because this ruler has now interrupted him. And then he can't even go to help this man in his time of need because, behold, he's interrupted again. Now, interrupted is the wrong word for Jesus. That might be the best word for us when we have our wishes in mind and our plans laid out, and then something comes in the way, and that, quote, interrupts us. But this is why Jesus came to earth. And so while the hustle and bustle is going on and there's intense emotions, Jesus responds with compassion. He responds to act, to help these people who are in need. Behold, this ruler comes needing help, and he helps. Behold, a lady comes and needs help and needs healing, and Jesus gives that healing and pronounces that healing upon her. And so while we might be tempted to fall victim to a life of chaos, a culture that would elevate, be busy, stay busy, that's how you show yourself to be important and vital. We can learn something from Jesus here, that only he is the answer to a life of, quote, chaos. That if we feel as though all of our loose ends in life are struggling to have any harmony, that we don't really know what's happening from one day to the next, turning to Jesus just as this man and this woman do is the only answer in chaos. Learn from his control. But then second, maybe this is the greater emphasis in this text. Let's keep reading verse 22 where we left off. Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter." Now you've got two daughters, right? Two women are mentioned, and they're both daughters. The ruler's daughter, and now this woman he calls daughter. "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." You hear the echo back to where the dad says, "My daughter has died." Now Jesus says to this woman, "Your faith has made you well." Instantly the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the ruler's house, back to the first story, and he saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." Now listen to this response to Jesus. And they laughed at him. The man comes expecting a response. I want Jesus to heal. The woman just barely wants to touch him. She's responding to Jesus in a clearly trustful way. Well, how do these professional mourners respond? With laughter, mockery. You're telling us that she's not dead but only sleeping? Verse 25, when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose, and the report of this went through all that district. The one thing that joins these two together, in addition to the happening in real time, that he cannot even get to the girl's house without the woman touching him, there's also this high level, highly aware sense of uncleanness that the Jews would have heard about and thought of when they heard these scenarios. That you've got someone who's died. She's laying in the house. Her father, who would presumably have been there with her before she died, he's out in the public. And Jesus, this teacher, a quote holy man, wants to go into her house. Well, death made everybody who was around it and who touched it unclean. And now Jesus is entering that realm of the unclean. But then the woman is the same way. She's had this female bleeding issue for 12 years consecutively. And according to the law, that would have rendered her unclean while that was happening. So Jesus allows her to touch him. He confronts our uncleanness by enduring these levels of uncleanness. Maybe the key detail for us to notice, at least at this stage, is that these scenarios do not make Jesus unclean. He can enter the room of the daughter. He can touch her. He can raise her from the dead, and yet he never becomes unclean. This woman can have this issue for 12 years. It's such a debilitating sickness that it stays for 12 years, and yet it does nothing to him to render him unclean. So Numbers 19, the end of that passage talks about those who are unclean. If a man who is unclean does not cleanse himself, that person shall be cut off from the midst of the assembly, since he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord, because the water for impurity has not been thrown on him. He is unclean. There was a procedure they had to follow if they were rendered unclean: by touching a corpse, a dead person, by coming in contact with someone who was soiled, similar to this woman's condition. The contact alone rendered those extra people unclean. Well, what God provided in Numbers 19 was this recipe. You're to take and to sacrifice a blameless heifer and scarlet and hyssop. And when you burn those up, they produce ashes. And then you store the ashes in a clean place. You set them aside. You set them outside the camp. And then you wash unclean people with this water that's got ashes in it. So it acts as a healing mechanism. But here's what's fascinating about that text in Numbers 19, is that the priests responsible for burning the sacrifice to create the ashes, they were considered unclean when they burned them. And the men who would apply the water to those who were unclean were considered unclean themselves for applying the cure to those who were unclean. So think about that for a moment. Even those who are participating in the cleanliness of the unclean under the law were temporarily still considered unclean. Now Jesus enters into two prominent places where people are unclean. And not only does he show a level of power over death and over sickness, he also shows that they have no power against him at all. They have no power to render him unclean. He came as the perfect Son of God, and his power is so great that he can rid death from the room, and he can rid illness that renders one unclean from the room, and it never touches him. When we talk about the authority of Jesus, take that for what it's worth. They have no power over him, even to the level of cleanliness and shame and appearance. His reputation is flawless. Through these scenarios that otherwise they would have tried to avoid, unless they be seen as unclean. Now, to take this deeper, look at the story of the woman again. It begins in verse number 20, goes through verse 22. It's just 3 verses. 3 times when she talks about being well, when Jesus says you're made well, when Matthew summarizes and says that she was made well, the word for well there is actually the word for save. And what's fascinating about that is it's the same in Mark and in Luke. So she says, if I can just get near enough to touch him, I will be saved. Jesus says, your faith has saved you. Matthew summarizes and says, instantly she was saved. There's something happening there on the level of the vocabulary to tell us that there's far more in view than simply a medical condition being stopped. Her medical condition being healed represents the salvation that she and every single one of us needs from sin. And Jesus offers that. And he offers that freely to anyone who would come to him in faith, just as she did. It might sound small for her to think, if I can just touch the hem of his garment. And yet that's part of Jesus' point. That any amount of trust and true faith in him will bring us to him in obedience, and thus he gives salvation. Matthew 1:21, when Joseph's receiving the message about Jesus being in Mary, the angel says, "She shall bear a son, you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." That's why he came. The miracles serve that purpose in a vital way, but the purpose is to save from sin. And him healing this woman in this way proves that salvation. The wording of Titus chapter 2 and verse 14 is fascinating in this discussion. Who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. The people in the house with that daughter who had died, the people who had made contact with the woman who was sick with this flow of blood, they were kept out, left out of being able to serve in any official capacity while they were unclean. They couldn't approach God in worship while they were unclean. Our sin defiles us to keep us from ever being in God's presence until Jesus purifies us, that we can approach him and serve him, walk in him, in his love. And of course, as we think again about the girl being raised from the dead, it's been said that Jesus didn't attend very many funerals because everyone that he attended, he broke up. He put an end to the funeral by raising the person from the dead. And so that's exactly what happens here. And that's at the root of why the people laugh at him and mock him, because they were professionals. There was a bit of an expectation, no matter if you had money or not, that you would hire these mourners to come around and mourn, lament over what's just happened. Well, they made their money, their livelihood, off of knowing who was dead and who was still alive. And so they're here essentially on the job. And Jesus says, no, you're wrong. She's not dead, she's sleeping. They laugh. Of course, he doesn't mean that she never died. He means that with him, death is always temporary. They had never heard such of a thing. They could never fathom such of a thing. Because prior to Jesus, in their experience, death had always been final. And as we consider this with sobriety, we need to keep remembering too that death does not have to be final. And it's only with Jesus that death does not have the final word. He'll make that promise. John chapter 11, verse 25, "I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Death will come to us in this life, yes, but it does not have the final say. It's not eternal, just as it was not for this daughter in her household when he takes her by the hand and raises her from the dead. And you'll notice he kind of, quote, violates the cleanliness laws, right? He touches a dead person, she rises, he is not made unclean. But third, notice there is another passage that we're going to consider, beginning verse 27. It's helpful to see all these together because, again, we're building toward how Jesus heals us ultimately from sin, gives us what we truly need most. Verse 27, as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, again touch happening in all 3 miracles. He touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, be it done to you." And their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went away and spread his fame through all that district. I think this is extremely interesting, especially for such a short, concise story. Not really one that gets talked about a lot. But notice these are 2 blind men. And notice how it begins. Verse number 27, 2 blind men followed him. How do blind men follow someone? How do blind men know where they're going? And as interesting as that question might be, I think in this passage, it's not even the most powerful question. The most powerful question, I think, is how do blind men come to believe in Jesus? This is not the first time they are acquainted with him. They cry out for mercy and they call him Son of David. So how have they come to believe that he has the power, the ability, and the desire to heal them? Clearly, it's dependent upon others for them to get around, to walk down the street, for them to go somewhere, for them to even follow Jesus. They would have depended on somebody else who could see, who could walk. But now we're getting to something I think that's powerful to see. They saw something, not by sight, but by hearing. They heard the reports of Jesus. Possibly, maybe likely, heard him teach. They had heard the scriptures. Don't you figure if you grew up blind, you would have highlighted or circled the passages from, say, Isaiah and the other prophets that talked about the Messiah coming and giving sight to the blind? So now all of this information that they have been holding on to, longing for the Messiah to come, they believe and understand that it's coming to life, that it's Jesus who is this Messiah. And so those two phrases, merciful Messiah, have mercy on me, Son of David, those fit their knowledge of him. It's just a couple of verses ago, 9 verse 13, where he himself said, go and learn the meaning of this statement. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. He lived out that mission, and they cry out asking for mercy. But then also for them to call him the Son of David means this is not just some new thing that happened this day for them. They've come to a deep understanding before they even ask Jesus to heal them. By calling him Son of David, they're recognizing, we believe you when you say you're the Messiah, that you're the one from the lineage of David. We believe you that you're the one who has come to heal your people. And we're crying out to you for mercy because of that. You'll notice it takes place, the miracle does, privately in a house. They approach him out in the public square on the street, and yet he takes them inside. So now you have this daughter raised from the dead inside a house. You have them being healed in the house. That's building toward Jesus telling them, don't go out and tell everybody what happened. But for them, this was the best thing they could have imagined, to have their sight restored. And that's where we have to keep reminding ourselves, what's the overarching purpose here? We could easily imagine some physical ailments that we have or someone we love has. And that if somehow we could have access to this same power of Jesus in an instant, that the cancer is removed, the arthritis is gone, the heart failure is gone, that if in a moment we could snap and all be healed, that's still not the greatest thing we could receive from God today. Him giving us spiritual sight, him healing our souls from sin, is the greatest thing we could ever experience. And thus, when you see the theme of faith in these two sections, that's crucial for us to walk away with. He says to the woman, by your faith, or your faith has made you well. It's led to you being saved today. And then he asks them, do you believe? Are you sure you believe? And they say, yes, we do. And he says, according to your faith, according to your trust. Because you trusted enough to come to me, because you trusted enough to ask me, then yes, I will heal you. And thus he offers to heal each of us when we come to him and trust him enough to come to him on his terms. It's always fascinating to kind of look at the end of this passage and similar ones and say, well, why did Jesus, possessing the greatest of news, tell these people not to tell? A couple of possibilities here. The first one maybe is that he doesn't want the reputation to spread that he's only a miracle worker, a healer, and that people come around him only to receive physical healing. He knows they view him differently, but he doesn't want that word of him to spread to those who might not know him differently. That's one possibility. I tend to think there's an even bigger possibility, especially when you consider Mark and how it's handled there and how they use the term Son of David. I think it's likely he understands there's a limited audience still who is ready to accept the fact that he's the Messiah. And so Jesus is trying to get people to slowly walk with him to see his authority unveiled. And so he tells them, you get it. You understand it. And for now, follow me, but don't go and try to save the world yourself. Keep this to yourself for now. But of course, two blind men come in and they can now see. Can't hide that very easily. So it's not as though they're breaking some major rule or commandment by telling, but Jesus wants them to participate in his mission. And so he says, hold off on telling the world. All right, what are some quick observations? As we think about their understanding, they all three, the father, the woman, the two blind men, they all know something before they ever come to Jesus. And it's there that we have to keep diving into our knowledge of him and letting that build our faith and trust to then act. So we would do well to learn from the first one, the father and the daughter, that he has the power over death. He separates life from death. He rose from the dead himself. Now, because he has once and for all come to the world, he has defeated sin and death. We no longer have to wait until it's urgent. He did what he could in that moment. And now that we see the full expansion of the gospel through Jesus Christ, now that we can know today, even when it's not urgent, we would do well not to wait until it's urgent. Similarly, about the woman, we don't have to wait until we've tried everything else. The other gospel accounts tell us that she had tried all sorts of doctors and approaches. She comes to him knowing that if I can just barely touch him, he's different. Well, we know all that he has to offer. We know all he has come and provided. And we do not have to sit back and think, well, I'll try this and I'll try that, and then maybe I'll give Jesus a chance. Because he is everything. He is above all and through all and holds all together. We can come to him now. We can obey him now instead of trying everything first. We need to redeem the time, make the best use of the time, because the days are evil. That means the longer we wait, the harder it will be. Today is the day of salvation. Today is the favorable time. Paul would say, 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 2. But then third, from the blind men, we do not have to wait for permission to tell others about him. There was a temporary stage in Jesus' ministry, which is why he said, hold off, don't tell. But now that the gospel is once and for all finished, he has once and for all conquered sin and death. There's no reason to wait to obey him, and there's no reason to wait to tell someone else about him. That no matter what someone else is dealing with, Jesus is the best solution, the best answer to our chaos, to our sickness, to our fears of death, to our lack of guidance that we'll find in the world around us. If you have not responded in faith by putting him on in baptism for the forgiveness of your sins, would you let today be that day? Let today be the day where you look back and say, everything changed because of the change he wrought in me. I'd love to see you make that decision. If you need to come to him in a public way, repenting of sin, we'd love to pray with you about that. If you have anything else that you're dealing with in life, we'd love our assistance and our prayers. Please know that we stand here ready to help you also. If you have any need at all, come as we sing together.